Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Bahraini pro-democracy activists prepare for anniversary of Uprising. Amnesty International calls for the trial of Indian troops in Kashmir. And Hamas divided over Abbas-led unity government. Mosaic. World news from the Middle East begins now.
Bahrain's February 14th coalition called on the people to return to Lulu or Pearl Roundabout under the slogan, "Hand in hand, we are all returning." This, as night marches were held across the country under the banner, "With our symbols, we are all returning." Protesters confirm they will return to the square to seek self-determination. Meanwhile, political societies and youth groups intensified calls to prepare to return to the square on the first anniversary of the start of protests in Bahrain. The regime is also preparing to crack down on the mobilization and has started to deploy its forces across the capital and around the Lulu roundabout, raiding homes and arresting revolutionaries and leaders. Among the activities planned to commemorate the first anniversary of protests launched on February 14, 2011 in Bahrain, Al-Wifaq Islamic Society called on holding spiritual and revolutionary events. There are plans to visit the martyrs' tombs this afternoon and celebrate the Prophet's birth at night. On Friday, people will gather to perform Friday prayers together. A revolutionary mobilization is expected on Saturday, and a reading of the Small Jawshan prayer and the People of the Frontiers supplication is planned for Monday. A revolutionary mobilization will take place on Tuesday, February 14th, under the slogan, "God is Great."
في هذه الأثناء نفذت مجاميع ائتلاف 14 من فبراير في البحرين.
Meanwhile, groups from the February 14th coalition cut off more than 90 roads, calling the action the scream of female prisoners. Different main streets were also blocked off in a number of Bahraini provinces with iron chains and burning tires. Smoke could be seen in the sky of the capital Manama and at the international airport on Muharraq Island. The secret operation came as a surprise as the February 24th coalition did not announce it beforehand, leading to heavy traffic in all main Bahraini streets. The February 14th coalition threatened to increase action on the ground if female prisoners are not released. Popular forces and political societies in Bahrain agreed to head to Lulu Roundabout on February 14th to commemorate the launch of the Intifada or uprising in the country.
Bahrainis continue to hold their peaceful demonstrations with the goal of attaining their legitimate demands of sweeping constitutional reforms. As part of this aspiration, all popular and political forces are preparing to return to Lulu, or Pearl Roundabout. The protest is being organized by popular groups and main political societies in the region of Al-Muqsha. They confirmed that they will march toward the square on February 14th. The protesters agree the regime must respond to the popular demands. The top demands are the downfall of the government and elections overseen by international monitors, since the regime said the demands for democracy and freedom would be met. Demonstrators warn that continuing the crackdown and ignoring these demands will push their struggle to a point of no return.
The right of self-expression and the right of assembly. The regime is trying to strip us of these two rights. I confirm today that we will go to Al-Manama to protest without anyone's permission and will challenge them. And I confirm this as one of our rights.
Al-Alam obtained images showing a side of the daily suffering endured by the residents of Bahrain amid what is now known as the clouds of toxic tear gas that loom over residential areas. Here, the regime's forces fire tear gas grenades at protesters and families in the area of Al-Ma'amir trying to save their child who is asphyxiated from the gas. And within the context of the complicity of the West, and specifically the U.S., with the Bahraini regime in suppressing the popular protests, Bahraini activists posted images obtained from a soldier's phone. The images reveal the participation of the regime's security and military forces in joint training sessions with the U.S. Marines to learn how to suppress peaceful protests.
Amnesty International has called for the trial of Indian security forces for their involvement in human rights violations in Kashmir. Amnesty's Asia-Pacific Program Director says the Indian Army must stand trial instead of hiding behind a controversial act. Sam Zarifi also called for the repeal of the act that confers special powers upon armed forces in what it calls disturbed areas. Zarifi, meanwhile, has hailed a recent statement by the Indian Supreme Court that says the security forces cannot claim immunity under the act.
There are so many other hundreds of cases where Indian Army has been responsible for raping women, Indian Army has been responsible for carrying out fake encounters, Indian Army has been responsible for enforced disappearances and so many other crimes. So what we would like to see in future is that after this case becomes a precedent, that Supreme Court takes a suo motu cognizance on the other cases where sanctions have been declined by the Home Ministry or the Defense Ministry.
Indian security forces have been accused of grave human rights violations, including torture, rape, and extrajudicial killings. India's Home Ministry has also acknowledged some cases of rights violations. The Himalayan region is in dispute between India and Pakistan. Thousands of people have been killed since insurgency hit Indian-controlled Kashmir in the 1980s. In Saudi Arabia, at least one protester has been killed and another 14 injured as government forces have opened fire on a large crowd of protesters in the oil-rich eastern province. Several protesters have been seriously wounded and are in critical condition. Activists say the situation is tense in the city of Qatif and the nearby villages. They say military vehicles have surrounded the city. Earlier, protesters took to the streets saying they will not be humiliated by the government. The protesters have been taken to the streets since last year, calling for more freedom and financial security. Saudi forces have killed 7 protesters since November. Rights groups have slammed Riyadh for its persecution of protesters and have called for an investigation into the killings. Moscow has warned against any Israeli military action directed at Iran. The senior Russian Foreign Affairs Ministry official says Tel Aviv's rhetoric on Iran's nuclear energy program is, quote, inventions. Mikhail Ulyanov says Israel's hardline approach to speculation that Tehran has a nuclear weapons program is baseless. Ulyanov has also warned that Tel Aviv's approach towards Iran is increasing tensions and could lead to a military conflict. He says a military solution by Israel in this scenario will have, quote, catastrophic consequences. Tel Aviv has long tried to make the case for an attack on Iran. Israel's military affairs minister has recently raised the possibility of an Israeli assault on Iran. Meanwhile, Tehran has again said its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes and has questioned the West's reluctance to investigate Israel's nuclear weapons program.
The news today, U.S. President Barack Obama has convinced Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to allow time for sanctions to bring pressure to bear on Iran. This according to the New York Times, which reports that Obama believes that Jerusalem is still considering its options, but like Washington, Jerusalem remains convinced that Iran must be forced to stand down on its nuclear weapons program. The Obama administration is also reportedly upset with Defense Minister Ehud Barak's recent comments about whether the Islamic Republic's nuclear facilities are on the verge of being made impregnable to attack. Barak recently said that the so-called zone of immunity will come into place, and after that time, Israel will no longer be willing or able to cripple Tehran's efforts to produce nuclear weapons.
It remains unclear if the nationwide general strike is nearing an end, as the Finance Ministry and the Histadrut Labor Federation teeter towards a deal to resolve months of dispute over the status of contract workers. IBA's Ariel Reshef joins us now in the studio with the latest. Ariel.
Good evening, guys. Well, despite the ongoing general strike, the day started out pretty optimistic, but reports are now circulating that the two sides are growing further apart. The parties received an extension from the National Labor Court to continue discussions until 6 p.m., at which time they'll be required to report on their progress. Many are saying that these ongoing negotiations are just prolonging the inevitable and that the structure of the agreement is already in place. But it appears that the holdup is the exact wording of a section dealing with the definition of so-called core workers. According to initial reports, the draft agreement contains two parts, one that deals with the government and the other with private employers. For its part, the Finance Ministry would be obligated to convert a few thousand contract workers into regular state employees with improved social benefits. But there's an ongoing debate about just how many of those workers should qualify for the upgrade. Finance Minister Yuval Steinitz has proposed that the government raise the wages of contract employees by 20 to 25%. He also agreed to raise minimum wage from 4,100 shekels to 4,500 shekels per month. If the deal goes through, the government will add additional 100 inspectors to ensure that the rights of contract workers are protected. The agreement with the private sector, negotiated by the Federation of Israeli Economic Organizations, includes a partial transfer of cleaning personnel to full employment. It also entails changing the status of other partial workers whose jobs are similar to those already employed on permanent contracts. The parties are now working on the legal framework of the deal, but if they fail to sign on the dotted line by tomorrow, the country could face yet another day of the crippling nationwide strikes. That would probably take place on Sunday. The general strike is said to be costing the government an estimated $500 million a day. And that, of course, has analysts worried about long-term economic repercussions. But in the meantime, the strike continues to wreak havoc on many of Israel's key sectors. All government offices, financial institutions, and train services have been shut down. The ray of light for travelers is that the Histadrut has ordered staff at Ben Gurion Airport to resume regular operations. Now, what's ironic about this two-day-old general strike on behalf of the contract workers is that it doesn't even include them. They've been forced to continue working as normal because they're not members of the Histadrut. Now, we'll just have to wait and see if the parties can come to a final agreement to avoid another costly day of work stoppages.
The Palestinian Authority began its consultations in Ramallah, paving the way for the formation of an interim government assigned to prepare for elections. Factions are scheduled to follow up on these consultations in Cairo on February 18th. The Hamas movement issued a statement at the Legislative Council in Gaza describing President Mahmoud Abbas's nomination for heading the government as a violation of the basic law of Palestine.
As soon as Palestinians received news of the Doha Declaration, the agreement seemed to be hitting a new obstacle. President Mahmoud Abbas's bid to head the new government sparked controversy. The Hamas movement issued a statement at the Legislative Council in Gaza describing the combination of heading both the authority and the new government as a violation of certain provisions of the Basic Law. Hamas added that the matter may call for amending the Basic Law with approval from the Legislative Council.
The issue is not about Abu Mazen as a person, though we personally have some reservations about his work, his behaviors and mentality in a number of his positions on this matter. But this is not a personal issue. Therefore, if the formation of this government was agreed upon and is underway, then it must be shown to the Legislative Council. The Palestinian Legislative Council has the jurisdiction to form governments, and any government that is not approved by the Palestinian Legislative Council is not a legitimate government.
The controversy was also mentioned at the consultations that kicked off in Ramallah to assess the outcome of the Doha Declaration. Members of the Palestinian leadership say that President Abbas's nomination to head the government does not violate the Basic basic law.
I read the law yesterday about 10 times. The president of the country has a right to nominate himself. He is requested to nominate someone, and he can nominate himself if the Legislative Council and representatives of the factions are ready to accept that.
At an emergency meeting for the Palestinian leadership, President Abbas said decisions will be made on the political situation and the formation of the government. After his bid for heading the government, all eyes are turning to the nomination of ministers, which are expected to be based on professional qualifications. It's known that their government will not last longer than 3 months, which is the expected period of time to prepare for the upcoming elections.
The Palestinian public is not interested in who is going to be the head of government or who the ministers will be. The Palestinian street is more interested in achieving unity, ending the division, and resisting the occupation.
It's not expected that an agreement will be reached that satisfies everyone. However, what is strange about the Palestinian situation is that the basic law, which was disabled and violated as a result of the division, returned as a source of political dispute among Palestinians.
The Syrian Revolution General Commission's media office reported that the Syrian army shelled the neighbourhoods of Baba Amr, al-Haladiyah and al-Bayada in Homs for the 6th consecutive day. The reports indicated that 65 people died in today's shelling of the city. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said 7 security members were killed in an ambush set up by defectors near Daraa.
The international community's failure to resolve the Syrian crisis has eliminated the possibility of any political solution. The international disputes over the subject created an additional burden for the mobilization that the country has been witnessing for over 11 months. As death has become a daily reality, military confrontations continue to intensify between the Syrian regime's military forces and defectors who are members of what is known as the Free Syrian Army. Dozens were killed in the past 2 days after the neighborhoods of al-Khaladiyah, Bab Amr, al-Bayada, and Wadi al-Arab endured the most violent shelling launched by government forces since the protests began in Syria.
700 people were wounded, and a number of others were martyred today by the rockets in Baba Amr alone. The situation is dire. There's no food, no medical supplies, and no medicine. We're short on food, water, and medical aid.
As rockets are hitting neighborhoods in Homs, government reports affirm they are targeting terrorist groups. Bab Amr is now empty of its residents, and the explosion of rockets and missiles is the only sound that can be heard. Meanwhile, Syrian state TV asserts that the Syrian army continues to capture groups of terrorists in Homs and other Syrian cities. Syrian activists confirm that defectors set up an ambush near the city of Daraa, south of the Syrian capital. 7 security members were killed and dozens of others were wounded. Alex Ayub, BBC.
UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said Arab League Secretary General Nabil al-Arabi informed him in a phone call that the League will resend a delegation of observers to Syria. Ban Ki-moon said Arabi asked for UN help with the project and proposed a joint UN Arab League observer mission. Ban Ki-moon added at a press conference that the implications of the Security Council's failure to reach a resolution on the situation in Syria were catastrophic. Since Russia and China exercised their veto powers at the Security Council, the death toll in Syria increased, and the Syrian government was encouraged to escalate its war against its people, according to Ban Ki-moon.
He further suggested that we consider a joint observer mission in Syria, including a joint special envoy. I briefed the Security Council. Many members expressed their views about the proposals. In the coming days, we will further consult the Council before fleshing out details.
Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir inaugurated the Transitional Darfur Regional Authority, DRA, in the capital of North Darfur, al-Bashir, and called on the displaced people of Darfur to return home. Al-Bashir, accompanied by Chadian President Idriss Déby and Qatar's Justice Minister, who represented Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani. The visit is being described as the first tangible step in implementing the Doha peace agreement signed between the government of Khartoum and the Alliance of Darfur's rebel movements. Sami al-Shinawi reports from al-Bashir, the capital of North Darfur.
The Sudanese president and his Chadian counterpart, along with the international community in Darfur, launched efforts aimed at implementing articles of the Doha document in a bid to resolve years of conflict in the region. Following al-Bashir's indictment on criminal charges and Déby's accusation of harboring armed movements, transferring authority to the people of Darfur has become a necessity, as confirmed by the Doha document.
For the sake of security and peace, the state hereby drops all charges and declares general amnesty for all wanted and convicted members of the Liberation and Justice Movement.
Between optimism and fear over the fate of the Doha Agreement, members of the DRA voiced their positions while keeping in mind the shortcomings of previous peace accords. However, everyone seems to agree that the success of Darfur's authority hinges on the seriousness of the Sudanese government and its commitment to the agreement.
This agreement has satisfied our ambitions to a great extent. It was signed with the blessing of the people of Darfur. We see it as the document that will help rebuild Darfur.
As the authority shifts from the central to the regional government, Khartoum will be able to close a dark chapter of the 9-year-long crisis, putting the final decision in the hands of the people of Darfur. Despite the hope expressed for the new transitional Darfur Regional Authority, many believe its success hinges on the level of logistic and technical support needed in post-secession Sudan. Sami al-Shinawi, al-Bashir, the state of North Darfur.
A nighttime raid was launched in Pakistan, targeting al-Qaeda's field commander. Pakistani intelligence officials confirmed the death of Badr Mansour, al-Qaeda's commander in Pakistan. The raid was carried out by a U.S. drone in Waziristan's largest city of Miran Shah in the country's northwestern region. This news was also confirmed by an official from the Mansour-led group, indicating that the organization's commander was killed in a nighttime raid.
مشاهدينا ونبدأ النشرة من أحداث يوم الثامن من شباط عام 1903.
February 8, 1963 saw a bloody conspiracy that targeted the July 14th revolution of 1958 and its patriotic leaders.
The February coup led to intense conflicts aimed at monopolizing power, discriminating against anyone different, eradicating the concept of a patriotic movement, and aborting the achievement of the Iraqi people in the revolution led by Abdul Karim Qasim.
في ذلك الشتاء المرير من عام 63 و900 وألف.
For Iraqis, the bitter winter of 1963 marked the beginning of a bloody history that disrupted their ideological, political and social affairs, tampered with their future, and dragged them into decades of exhausting destruction. The frenetic coup was plotted and led by a militia that adopted terrorism as its slogan, under the umbrella of the defunct Ba'ath Party led by Saddam and the so-called opportunistic nationalists, extremists and adventurers.
القوميين ومتطرفين ومغامرين انتهازيين.
زمرة وعصابة إشباط التي قتلت خلال
The February coup gang killed 7,000 talented and noble Iraqi people within 2 or 3 days in a way that no other gang in the world has done. Life stopped in Iraq on February 8th. Politics was not the only target. Art and literature also came under attack. From there began 9 months of a horrific nightmare for the Iraqi people.
ميليشيا الحرس القومي شكلت بقانون 35 الذي صدر في
The National Guard militia was formed by Law 35, which was issued in the dark night of February 8th under a false title, Ba'ath for Safeguarding the Arab Nation's Objectives, and replaced the official political parties. The militia ravaged the land with corruption and began purging the Iraqi people using bloody methods rarely seen in history. Nearly 16,000 Iraqis were killed within 6 months in massacres, violations and encroachments that were systematically carried out without any legal repercussion or moral justification.
هذا الانقلاب الدموي الأسود أحتفظ بذاكرتي بالتالي لأول مرة بحياتي وأنا ما زلت.
I still remember this dark, bloody coup. For the first time, and I was only an elementary school student, I saw a man hanged at a public soccer field called Habib Field at the entrance of Sadr City. There was a large crowd of citizens, and the hanged man was wearing red clothes. Even now, I still cringe at the memory of this bloody moment. The National Guard was sending a message to everyone who dissents and resists.
الحرس القومي كان يبعث بهذه الرسالة لكل معارض أو مقاوم.
لقد اختطت سلطة شباط البعثية مفهوم احتكار العمل السياسي وإقصاء.
The Ba'ath authorities of the February 8th coup underlined the concept of political monopoly and expulsion of others by adopting the culture of conspiracy, planting the seeds of corruption, and establishing a political program based on the barbaric use of force. It was characterized by a backward political belief and a bloody and dictatorial leadership that rendered Iraq a gruesome prison guarded by killers and gangs who turned the prison into a slaughterhouse for most patriotic people.
ما تزال الذاكرة العراقية تحتفظ اليوم.
Iraq still remembers the events of February 8th, which were bloody to say the least. On this day, a real coup was carried out over democracy in Iraq that aborted all attempts for peaceful engagement that blossomed after the July 14th revolution. From Baghdad, Zaid Al-Ta'i, Al-Araqiya.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Wincoat Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic. Airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories, world news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.